Hello and welcome. Welcome. I am your host, Jeff, and this is Forged from the Ashes, episode number 7, CJD, Real, Rare, and Very Relentless. And I wanted to take just a little bit of time to just touch base a little bit about this disease and kind of my own personal experience. And as well, I also want to raise a little bit of awareness. But here's the thing. I promise this isn't going to be a medical lecture, or I'm not going to overwhelm you with a bunch of medical jargon or complicated terms, because there's a bunch. But this is my story of a disease that cannot be cured. And in addiction, your mind becomes your own worst enemy. And mine did. But there's a disease out there that most people have never heard of. Once you do, tend not to forget it. And it's not something that's brought up on a regular basis or something that even gets a lot of attention. And because of that, most people will go their entire lives without ever knowing it exists. But that doesn't make it any less real. And it definitely doesn't make it any less dangerous. It's called Creutzfeldt Jakob's disease, or CJD for short. At its core, it's a rare, rapidly progressive brain disease that doesn't give you time to figure it out once it starts. And it's caused by something called prions, which are basically misfolded proteins that trigger a chain reaction in the brain, causing normal proteins to misfold as well. Over time, that process literally destroys the brain cells, leaving the brain with like sponge-like holes in it. And believe me, that's not an exaggeration. What makes this disease different from most others is how fast it moves and the fact that there is no cure. There's no treatment out there that'll stop it. There's no way to slow it down once symptoms begin. And when it shows up, it progresses quickly. And we're talking months, not years. And it starts with things that, might seem small at first. A little memory problems, some confusion, changes in behavior, but it doesn't stay there. It escalates into severe dementia, loss of coordination, vision problems, and eventually coma, then death. There are a few different ways that this disease can show up. So the most common is sporadic CJD, which means that it just happens for reasons nobody really understands. The second one is called familial or hereditary, which is passed down through genetics. And then there's the extremely rare cases, like 1%, that can be acquired through like medical procedures or contaminated materials. But regardless of how it starts, the outcome is the same. This is a fatal disease, and because it's so rare, it just doesn't get talked about enough. It doesn't get the same awareness as other conditions, and that means a lot of people don't understand it until it directly affects someone they know. And when it does, it's not just the person diagnosed who feels it. It hits the families, it hits the loved ones, it changes everything around it. And this isn't something, I'm talking about from a distance, or something I read, or it's not even from a documentary. This is something that became real in my life. And when something like this becomes real to you, your perspective changes fast. You start to understand how fragile things actually are. You start to see how quickly everything can shift. And you realize that some things don't come with second chances or long lifetime or long timelines. Sorry. And that's why I wanted to take the time to talk about it. Not to turn this into a medical breakdown. And again, not to overwhelm you with a bunch of terminology, but to bring some awareness to something that is very real and something that is very serious and something that deserves a little more attention than it gets. Because just because something is rare doesn't mean it doesn't matter. For me, this isn't just something I learned about. It's something that actually runs through my family. This is something I've seen up close, something that's affected people I'm connected to, and something that eventually became very personal in a way I couldn't ignore. So, years ago, mother's oldest brother, my uncle, got sick. And at first, nobody really knew what was going on. There were tests, appointments, more tests, and still no real clear answers. They were trying to figure it out, trying to make sense of something that didn't really fit. But eventually, after a lot of digging and research, CJD was brought up as a possibility. But here's the reality with this disease: it cannot be definitively confirmed until after death through an autopsy of the brain. So even then, there was uncertainty while everything was unfolding. Knowing that it was probably Creutzfeldt Jakob's disease, things moved fast. His symptoms progressed quickly, faster than anyone was really ready for. And then before long, he was gone. And later, it was confirmed that he had the variant CJD, the hereditary version. That's the reality of this disease. Once it starts, it doesn't give you much time. But when something like this shows up in your family, especially the hereditary form, it opens a door that most people never have to think about. It brings up a question that's hard to ignore. Is this something that I'm carrying too? At one point, our family had the opportunity to get tested. Some of them chose to, the others, they didn't. And I didn't at the time. You know, Back then, life moved on, things got busy, and like a lot of things, I kind of pushed it to the side. And not because it wasn't important, but because it was easier not to face it. And then years later, after everything that had already happened in my life, after everything started stacking the way it did, it came back around. And at this time, it wasn't just something I could just push off. I made the decision to get tested, and that's a different kind of moment because once you make that decision, once you get tested, there's no going back to not knowing. You're stepping into something that has real weight behind it. You're asking a question that could change how you see your future, really how you think, how you live. And then comes the waiting. And that part, waiting for results, because waiting for them like that, it just sits with you. It's not something you think about once and just move on. It's in the background of everything. It's in the quiet moments. It shows up when you're by yourself, when you're laying in bed. It shows up when your mind starts running. And you think you start thinking about what it means either way. And you start thinking about time. You start thinking about what your life looks like depending on the answer. I know mine did because I looked 10 years down the road and I looked at a few months down the road. And there's no way to fully prepare yourself for that because this isn't just a test result. This is something that could redefine everything. When the results finally came back, it wasn't a maybe. It wasn't unclear. And I had my gut feelings from the very beginning. And the genetic counselor that I talked to was super nice, super sweet. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She gave it to me direct. I tested positive for the 5 octopeptide insert with a codon 129 polymorphism or 129 MV. That's the only medical jargon I'm going to get into. It's a genetic mutation associated with the hereditary Creutzfeldt Jacob's disease. And that's a different kind of moment because it's not like getting told, you might be at risk. It's being told that this is something you carry, something that's gonna show up. But if it does, you already know how it ends. And there's no real way to prepare yourself for that. Your mind, it doesn't stay in one place with news like that. My mind was all over the place. My mind, it moves fast. And I remember thinking the one place my mind went to after I talked to my wife was my son. Because now it's not just about me. It's about what I might have passed on. And that's a different kind of weight. And I wasn't ready for it. And I started asking questions that I didn't want to ask. I started thinking about possibilities that, I wish weren't there. You start wondering if something that's sitting in you could be sitting in him too. And there is no easy answer to that in that moment. There's really just a thought and it stays with you. But at the same time, you're trying to process your own reality, trying to stay grounded and, trying to tell myself this, okay, it's not happening right now. But in addiction, I thought it was happening to me right now. And that's how my mind worked. It jumped ahead. It started filling in all these little blank spots that, weren't filled in yet. It started building scenarios like, okay, so I probably only have about a month to live. And this is my brain, my worst enemy talking back to me. I started looking at life completely different. I started thinking about time in a way you never did before. And for me, it was, well, I better start drinking more. And I also started questioning things, like what really mattered, what doesn't matter, what do I need to hold on to? What do I need to really let go of? And even though this episode isn't about going back into everything that followed, I'd be lying if I said it didn't affect me deeply, because it did. It was that one of those moments that kind of helped keep pushing me up to the very top of that hill so I could just slide all the way down it. It changed how I thought. It changed how I felt. Changed how I looked at myself, and it changed how I saw my future. But this is where I want to be clear about something. Okay, this disease, CJD, it is rare. Most people will never encounter it. Most people will never have to even think about it the way I have. But just because something is rare doesn't mean it isn't real. Because when it does show up, it changes everything. Again, not just for the person diagnosed, for everybody around them, families, children, for the ones that you love the most. And one of the most important things to understand is that CJD is not something you catch through everyday contact. It's not spread through being around someone or, conversation or anything like that. It's in your DNA, I guess. But once it does begin, it moves fast and it doesn't stop. My mother went into the hospital October of 2024, and she passed away December 16th, 2024, from this disease. And that's why awareness matters, not fear, awareness, understanding what it is, understanding how it works, understanding that even rare diseases deserve attention. Because for the people affected by them, it's not rare at all. It's everything. And for me, this isn't just information. This is something I carry. This is something that I'm going to have to live with. And based on my family history, and there's a penetrance rate, which is, they don't even give a number for it. It's just high. It's not a matter of if it hits. It's just a matter of when it hits. That changes your perspective, whether you want it to or not. And if there's one thing I want people to take from this episode, it's this: don't ignore the things that you don't understand. Don't push away what feels uncomfortable to think about, because awareness isn't about scaring yourself. It's about being informed. It's about being present. It's about understanding that life doesn't always follow that script we expect it to. You don't have to have all of the answers. Just don't give up on yourself. And remember, we rise, we recover, and we reignite hope together. This is Jeff with Forged from the Ashes. Until we meet again for episode 8, take care of yourselves and be kind to one another. Thank you.